Coming up on this week's show, the Amiga Mini is finally here.
A Nintendo 64 classic is reborn.
And we get the inside story on Earthworm Jim and Shiny Entertainment with David Perry.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one book you should look out for coming very soon, a reprint that's due this May, is A Guide to Japanese Role-Playing Games. A real deep dive into that genre, featuring more than 600 classic titles. You can read all about that and the rest of their retro gaming range on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 319, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to this week's show, where we get an excuse to dork out about classic video games for the next hour-ish, normally more like an hour and a half, isn't it? And of course, we take you behind the scenes on everything that's been happening in the world of retro gaming and technology over the last 7 days. There has been a certain product that I've got in my hand, actually fits in one hand, that has actually took most of my attention up over the last couple of days. I'll talk more about in just a bit. But of course, we are going to be chatting about all the big news stories over the last week and a very special guest on the show, as always. Now, actually, the guest that we've got this week, we're going to be crossing over to California to catch up with someone who we've actually wanted on this podcast since day one.
I've wanted to speak to David Perry since I was a kid. I remember watching Bad Influence and seeing the kind of sections with David Perry on there. And we are, he's known as Dave Perry as well, but we didn't want to cause any confusion with the Games Master host. He's the absolutely amazing developer of Disney's Aladdin, Cool Spot, and the Earthworm Jim series, which for me were groundbreaking games. Like when Aladdin came out, it was really like, wow, Disney has actually hit the consoles and the computer systems, and they've done it really well. The animation on that was just stunning. Do you remember that one, Joe?
Yeah, man, I loved Aladdin. Like, Aladdin was the one that they famously actually got, like, the actual artists from Disney in, didn't they? And they, like, hand drew, like, a load of, like, the cells and stuff in the game. So I'm really looking forward to listening to this one because you guys jumped on it. And Aladdin is, like, an amazing Mega Drive game. And it was, like, the third top-selling Mega Drive game as well. So I know this one's going to be an absolute killer episode.
Now, we did an episode actually all about those Disney games with William Anderson, who worked with David, a few years ago now, probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And that was a really interesting insight. And I remember, you mentioned a couple of others there, Ravi, that, are maybe slightly more obscure, but I was a massive fan of Cool Spot. And that was it was kind of that era when brand-based games were coming in.
They
did
were
Global
called
Gladiators.
Advergames at the time, which was that kind of cross between advertising. And to be honest, Cool Spot was the best. I remember there was a load that came out that were really bad, but Cool Spot was actually a decent title. And I didn't know of him. He was a 7-Up full stop, wasn't he? I didn't know of him until the game came out, so kind of exposed the whole character to me.
Without getting too off topic, I remember Fido Dido was a mascot for 7. I didn't know whether it was different in the UK or the US. I always thought maybe Cool Spot was more the American kind of mascot, but obviously when the game came out, we all associated it with 7-Up. But he also worked with, that Global Gladiators game for McDonald's that he worked on as well. Oh, wow, really? It was that era when, suddenly it just felt like big companies finally got gaming.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like you said, he did Aladdin and Disney suddenly took gaming seriously as well. So it was a real big change in the industry. And then, of course, we get into him setting up Shiny Entertainment, and we focus a lot on the Earthworm Jim games and Earthworm Jim 1 and 2. Absolute classics. And, I say in this interview, that playing that game actually felt like you were playing a Warner Brothers cartoon, didn't it?
It was crazy. It had the art of Nick Bruty, and they kind of worked together. Nick's been on the show as well. And I just love the advancements in that. It was quite late on in the Mega Drive's life. And, oh my God, Earthworm Jim and Earthworm Jim 2 as well. Just such innovative level designs and kind of ideas that went into that game.
Yeah, so we're going to be chatting to David Perry. Actually, we've got to say thank you to David because he lives in California. He actually went on the roof and set his satellite dish up because he's on Elon Musk's Starlink testing it out. So if he didn't do that, we couldn't have done this interview. So we appreciate the effort, David. And we are going to be getting the inside story on all those classics with him on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, we have got something in my hand that a lot of people have been talking about over the last couple of weeks. Can you think what I've got in my hand, Joe?
Is it a Nokia 3310?
It's not a Nokia 3310.
It's the Amiga Mini, isn't it?
Of course, it's the Amiga Mini.
Woo! It's finally here. Well, it's not quite here, is it? It's finally in reviewers' hands, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I've had this for, I've actually had it for about 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
The guys at Retro Games Limited were kind enough to send it over, and hopefully we're going to have Darren from the team on the show for a bit of a chat next week ahead of, the date comes out. He's at GDC, so hopefully we can make that work. But yeah, they sent this, a few of us have got it, and by the time this episode comes out, my YouTube video should be up. I mean, I thought I'd let, the big YouTubers get theirs out first, 8-Bit Guy and Perifractic and all that. I'll come along with the smaller fry video that no one will watch. But I'm really impressed with this. Now, I know people are maybe not regular listeners, might not know, but, the Amiga is definitely my favourite platform of all time, since I got my first one when I was like 11 years old, I got my Amiga. So I've always wanted something like this because, there's been this trend of, everything's been miniaturized over the last few years. The Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, the NES, PlayStation.
Even the turbo graphics. And there's been some quite odd ones. And I think the Amiga kind of fits into that category of maybe the lesser known ones in other countries and stuff. But I think it's going to be good because I noticed when the turbo graphics came out, there were a lot of people buying it that had never used the system before. So hopefully this will open up people to the world of Amiga.
Well, that's what I'm thinking as well, because obviously it was a big system in Europe, not so much in America, very big in Australia too. But the thing about the Amiga is, because that many different companies kind of own a piece of the pie, legally it's very complicated, which is why I think something like this hasn't been possible until now. So it's incredible that they're finally... I mean, you look at this machine here, there's no Amiga branding on it. But it's called the A500 Mini.
It's amazing that they actually got it out because there's so much stuff about the licensing of the ROMs, the operating system, the name, the logo. Oh, God. It's been a lawsuit kind of nightmare, the Amiga story, and that's prevented a lot of kind of, developments and stuff. So I'm so happy. This is like a little dream for me to have an actual Amiga product going into the shops.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're going to be able to walk into, a high street retailer and buy an Amiga again for the first time since 1995, which, is a massive achievement in itself. And if you want the review of it, condensed, obviously I'll post my YouTube video that's going to be, it's about half an hour long. So, I kind of go into all sorts on there, but it runs amazingely well. Because I know, when the C64 Mini came out, there was a few complaints about, controller latency and that kind of thing. Nothing like that on here. I've played a bunch of there's 25 games pre-installed on it, and they all run just as well as they ever did on an original Amiga 500. And I think for me, because there's a lot of stuff I played all the time as a kid. You got Another World on there. You got Chaos Engine on there. That were games that, my brother and I, in that pre-internet era, that's all we do. Every night we probably spent 1,000 hours on those games. So I know them like the back of my hand. So I can tell, if they're running well or not. And actually, they run amazingly well on here. Very cool that you can put a USB stick in and load your own games on it straight away as well.
Yeah, some of these systems are locked down, aren't they? So,
yeah, they are.
The Nintendo ones were locked down and they were kind of a certain selection of games. But this one seems quite open. What do you think about it, Joe? What do you think it sounds like? Is it something that you'll be picking up?
Yeah, no, I've already said before. I really want to get my hands on one because of, one, it turned out my wife used to play one as a child, which I never knew. Like, in the 6 years we've been doing this show, she never...
We should have got her on to be...
Yeah, I know, I should have got her on for her first impressions of stuff. But I'm really unfamiliar with the Amiga. I've only ever played them at your guys' houses, briefly. So I'm really excited to get hold of one because I'm kind of like, I guess I'm, we all thought I was kind of the demographic. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm the kind of person it's aimed at, like somebody who's interested in retro games or kind of has an interest in the Amiga because they want to know more about it and hasn't got the time or the know-how to sit and set one up. Do you know what I mean? And we were actually talking to Ashley on the Patreon hangout the other day, and he was saying he's going to get one for his brother because it's perfect for him because he loved it as a child, but he hasn't got the time, once again, to be playing around with an Amiga, in 2022. So it's perfect for people like that. So I'm really excited to get one when they go on retail.
Well, I've seen, so we've had one at Amiga Addict as well, which is the magazine that I work for. And I've seen like that they've done the menus really well and the kind of customization with it is great. The ability to kind of add 10 megabyte extra fast RAM, well, 8 megabyte and 2 meg chip. It's really good. So you'll be able to play like a huge selection of games. And what's the system it works on, Dan? It's a WHD load, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's a system that's been around for a while where really what you can do is you can put games that were originally made on floppy disk and install them on a hard disk, or in this case, on a ROM.
And multiple disks as well you can have on one selection. Yeah.
And I'll say it's really quick. You load like Pinball Dreams from the menu, you're in the game in like 2 seconds, straight on, really, really quickly. But I think, Joe made some interesting points there as well, and you're right. I mean, because the Amiga was a computer, there's a lot more involved to emulating it than there is something like a Mega Drive, for example. So what I'd say about this is, it's an Amiga for console fans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you run the applications on it and like do your old paint programs and stuff like that?
Not easily, but you can, and I have.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's already being hacked by Dan Wood.
Yeah, it's a bit round the houses, and it took to actually go in and kind of manually edit some files and stuff to get it working. But I did get it booting Workbench, and in my video I'll link up, I run DPaint on there, a word processor, the old Say program, the speech synthesizer that we all made swear words in as kids, So that all runs fine on here. So, the Amiga emulation experience does go beyond that, and I run some scene demos on it as well. Got a lot of those working great on here. The Tank mouse as well, which, if you listen to it, this is included mouse with it. Listen to those nice clicky buttons. It's a recreation of the original mouse, which I said last week, and I wasn't a big fan of it as a kid. But actually, this is smaller. It's about 3/4 of the size of the original, and I think this is actually comfier than the original version. It fits nicer in the hand.
Well, I think that 8-Bit Guy made a really good point, which is, I think it's like £115 that it's selling for, but you are getting a mouse that you can use on your PC as well as on the Amiga, and a controller. So, that does justify it a bit.
Which I've got here. The controller is kind of like a shrunk down CD32 controller, but actually they've took away all the stuff that we didn't like about the CD32.
Like that awful D-pad.
That was terrible. That was like just a disc with bumps on, wasn't it? On the CD32.
God, it was hell.
So you got a proper D-pad here, and actually, it feels nice and responsive. I was playing, so I'm more a joystick guy on the Amiga, but I must admit I was playing a lot of games and actually playing them, well for me. I'm not the best gamer in the world, but actually had no problem playing it on this control pad, which normally I'm more of a joystick guy. The buttons feel nice. It actually feels a bit like, the other side of it where you've got the action buttons, very similar to like a Super Nintendo controller.
And you can remap that as well. So like up to jump was the kind of awful thing on the Amiga for a lot of games that a lot of people aren't really used to. So being able to remap that to a button is just a game changer, really.
Yeah, because up to jump works fine on a joystick, but trying to do it on a pad is a nightmare. But you can do that. And, you mentioned before about changing the RAM configuration and that kind of thing. Quite cleverly, there's two stages of preferences in there. You either get the basic just, do you want to use mouse, keyboard and remap the buttons, or you can turn on an expert advanced mode where you can go in and do all that kind of, change your RAM and all that, and the copper and the blitter and all that. You can change a lot of stuff, put it in kind of turbo mode, for the more demanding games. I will say, though, I did try to run some, which obviously this thing's not designed for, but I tried to run some of the, the top-end, 060 demos and stuff on there, which it struggled with.
Yeah, I can imagine it's going to struggle because it's got a, limited kind of CPU. But another thing that I saw as well was it had 4 save slots. So games that you can save on these WHD load games, but games that don't have the save function, you can do a kind of save state, I guess, and you could do that 4 times, which I think is really interesting.
And that's for each game as well. Every game has 4 save slots individually. Wow. So, yeah, and they launch, like you said, it saves the game where you are. Next time you launch it, it's literally click a button and you're back where you left it off. So I think, I'm looking at this, and this is going to go next to my PS5 in my living room. Obviously, it outputs via HDMI, plugs into my modern, 65-inch Sony telly. No messing around. I just think it's a great little machine. I mean, I'm going to see my brother in a couple of weeks, and he's like, you've got to bring that up. And we, bit of 2-player Lemmings and stuff after a few drinks is always fun. So I think it's going to be a great little party system. And I think just having an Amiga back out there again, and hopefully it'll be, a good gateway to kind of get people into it. I think especially, guys like you, Joe, that are more of a console background. So yeah, my review is thumbs up.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
I think it's definitely for somebody with a console background. I've got 6 Amigas. I don't need any more. But people who kind of, just interested and just kind of spot it as a kind of compulsive purchase, that could be good.
That's what I say in my video, because a lot of people, I've seen it on Facebook comments like, you could just get a Raspberry Pi and emulate on that. It's not for people to do that. This is for what I think, it's someone who either has been curious about the Amiga or had one 30 years ago. They'll walk into Asda, see it on a shelf, and they'll be like, oh my God, I've not thought of the Amiga since like 1992. God, Chaos Engine, I remember that. Oh, I'll buy that. That's the audience I think they're aiming this at.
Yeah. And hopefully that'll bring more people to the scene, and then they'll go and buy the classics and stuff like that.
Before you know it, you're listening to our podcast, you're buying Amiga Addict, you're spending thousands of pounds on eBay. That's how it all starts, isn't it?
Slippery gateway drug.
Yeah. So if you've watched all the good videos on it so far, I'll link mine up as well. There's a little bonus in the show notes at theretrohour.com. Now let's move on to something else not Amiga related, because this is actually a really cool little racing game, which looks right up my street, actually. This is a retro arcade racer called Slipstream, is this? I've not played this one before. Was this a PC game previously then?
I think it's a brand new game.
Okay.
It's a brand new game, which is coming out on April 7th for Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox. And I did think of you guys, actually, when I saw this one, because of, I don't know if you've seen it, Ravi, but it's very reminiscent of it. It kind of like reminds me of like Lotus Challenge and Top Gear and stuff, like, from the early 90s.
Yeah.
But then it kind of in between that and the original Need for Speed for the PlayStation.
Bit of Ridge Racer, maybe.
Yeah,
as well.
A little bit of Ridge Racer looking, but
kind of a very outrunny intro as well, where they're driving along the beach, but then it's got that like Japanese kind of car feel as well.
Yeah, 100%. So funny enough, it's actually coming from a Spanish indie developer called Bitworks, and I'm looking forward to this one. But it is essentially an old school arcade racer in the vein of kind of like that 1990 era, isn't it? And I really like the look of it, and it's got like all the local, multiplayer split screen up to 4 players. It's got like rewinding time in it, so you can crash really badly and burn out and stuff like that on it. But,
I need that.
Yeah, I need it as well. And you can rewind up to 5 seconds, and it looks pretty. I don't know. I think the graphics look really, really nice.
Yeah, it's. I've played one that was a kind of recreation, which was Horizon Chase Turbo, and that was done in the kind of modern shader kind of style graphics and a bit cartoony, where this feels really hand-drawn pixels. Like,
yeah,
everything feels really defined. And
yeah, I would agree. It's got a real kind of like you say, hand-drawn look to it, and I think it's got a really nice kind of like Miami Vice, that kind of Miami, GTA Vice City kind of look to it. That real 80s look to it, and all the cars are kind of in that vein.
Inspired by classic models.
Yeah, inspired by, but never quite a Ferrari or anything like that.
Yeah, a Ferraro.
Yeah. But also the soundtrack as well. There's like 9 exclusive songs, which are actually by a synthwave artist, Stefan Moser. I think his name is Efro Harky. Yeah. So and it's got all like the graphical options like CRT scan lines and stuff like that. And there's it isn't just single player and multiplayer. There's like Grand Prix mode, Cannonball mode, Grand Tour mode, time trial battle royale, and there's like 20 tracks and 5 different cars. So it looks like a real labor of love.
It feels like very low down. So like the perspective of where you're looking quite low, and the cars are like quite sporty and low, and it gives me a kind of I don't know, Ridge Racer Wipeout kind of feel as well.
You see it for me, it reminds me of the games I listed off earlier on, like the original Need for Speed, and I think it's definitely a Mega Drive or a Super Nintendo racer, which it looks really similar to. I think it might be Top Gear. I think it came out in like 91, 92, but it's really kind of captured that kind of look for me. But I know
what you mean with the Need for Speed kind of.
Yeah, and I think this looks great as well. I mean, actually, graphically, it's got like sprite scaling and stuff in there as well. It kind of reminds me a bit like how the Mega CD did it, or even the Atari Jaguar actually did quite nice. Sprite scaling.
Yeah,
so it kind of reminds me of that.
Interesting. Apparently, it's actually built on its own like graphics engine. They actually built it themselves. Like it's like a custom one. It's not like based on any other game or anything like that. They worked with a Brazilian developer called Ansdor apparently to make it. So they've built it from the ground up, which I think is pretty cool. That they've managed to do that with their own game engine and capture that feel and look of it.
And it's interesting that they've opted for local multiplayer as well instead of online, which is quite cool. I kind of like that. You have to physically get people into your house.
Well, it's perfect for me because me and my wife is a gamer, and she gets frustrated when we haven't got games to play together. So whenever anything like this comes out, it's always perfect because it's something for her to play with me and it's retro. So
yeah, but you just need to put a bit of cardboard on the screen to split it so she can't see what you're doing.
And I'm pleased as well that it's not just, 'cause there's been so many, and, some done very well, but so many kind of Outrun kind of rip-offs, There's one I play on my Switch, 80s Overdrive, which is really good, and I've got Outrun on, Sega Ages and stuff like that, but I kind of feel like I've played that kind of genre to death. Having something like this that actually, it looks a bit more kind of early to mid-90s kind of area, and especially, I'm looking at some of the graphics in here, because it is kind of some polygon kind of graphics too, and you've got these kind of little polygons at your skid marks around your tires and stuff like that as well. That kind of reminds me of something maybe the 3DO or the PS1 would have done, or maybe even N64, that kind of.
And that's where that Need for Speed kind of feel came from, because that came out on the PlayStation 1, but I'm sure it was on the 3DO or CDI at first. Yeah. So that's straight away what my kind of mind went to. So yeah,
this would have been the Saturn's killer game, app, this one.
So yeah, it looks really cool. That comes out next month, so if you want to get hold of it, I'll link it up in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, we're going to be talking about this incredible new Capcom announcement in just a minute, and an N64 game that is back for 2022. And, of course, that chat with David Perry coming through soon. Just let's take a second there to give a massive thank you to the people who make it possible for us to do the Retro Hour podcast for you each and every Friday. And that is you, our wonderful patrons. If you're not part of the community so far, honestly, we'd love to have you on board. Join us on Patreon. I mean, we've got 3 different tiers. Starts in the price of a cup of coffee once a month. And you'll be part of the Retro Hour community and get invited to things like the monthly hangouts that we do that are always such a giggle. Actually, I was looking because I posted a picture because I haven't took any screenshots of recent hangouts. So I posted one from one of the earliest ones that we did back in 2020. I think there was 6 people on. And now we get 30, 40 at its peak.
Yeah, we really need to update that picture because they are a lot busier now, which is amazing. And also I've got a really big COVID beard, lockdown beard in it, which I don't have anymore. So yeah, but really, like you say, the patrons are the lifeblood, and we absolutely love that you guys, put your hands in your pockets and help the show out. But also, one thing what we do want to take advantage of with the patrons is we actually do have a really big project coming up soon, which
you're talking about the project,
which we are going to be announcing in the. I don't want to put a date on it, but we're going to be announcing it soon, and we're going to be
any day now, yeah.
And we're going to put it to the Patreons first and get their thoughts and their feedback on it and stuff like that. So you'll be in the know there if you do sign up as well.
And help us with it as well. I think, I don't want to give too much away, and some people might be able to guess what it is. But, this is probably the second biggest project that we've done after the podcast.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and
there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes at the Retro Hour. And, your opinion, we value it as well. So it's really good to have you guys on board, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, so if you back us on Patreon, you're going to find out all about that very soon, and help us with it as well, actually, because we do need some of your feedback too. And also, if you join this weekend, if you're a gold member or above, you're going to get to hear even more of us guys, because we've just dropped a brand new episode of our second podcast that we release every single month just for patrons, called the Retro Hour After Hours. And this one, loads of fun. We concentrate on retro handheld systems.
I'm going to talk all about the Tiger Electronics.
It's your favourite. Don't give it away that that's your favourite.
There's 2 hours of that.
Well, if you love, the Game Gear, the links, all this classics, so we really go in depth on that and give our favourite games as well. So however you want to support the show, we hugely appreciate it. But if you'd like to back us on Patreon, you'll find all the details at theretrohour.com. Come and join the Retro Hour community. And of course, if you join us on Patreon, you're going to find your space in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. I feel like we need some music for the Hall of Fame.
That's a good idea. Let's do that.
Yeah. Hall of Fame.
Ravi's jingle there. So let's give a huge thank you to our latest supporters on Patreon. A massive thank you to Mike Lewis,
Keelan Smith,
and Luke Carter-Key,
who all joined us on Patreon inside the last week. Thank you so much for your support. We really, really appreciate it. And if you'd like to join them, all the details are at theretrohour.com. So it seems to be a bit of a thing at the moment that we're getting these, massive collections of classic games. Of course, last week we were talking about, Konami and the Turtles Cowabunga collection. But it seems like Capcom are not going to be outdone by that. They've announced a new 10-game retro fighting collection that's coming soon.
Right up Joe's street, this one.
Yeah, this is right up my street. So this was announced about a week ago. And it's going to be coming out on June 24th, on all the big consoles, Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch. But what's really cool about this is it's going to be 10 classic fighting games. And what's pretty cool is it isn't 8 of them a Street Fighter 2.
That's what I thought when I first read it. I was like,
that's Capcom's usual trick. But what they're actually doing is, I don't know if this is the first time they've done this, but the Darkstalker series, there's 5 games of that. I'm not too sure if you guys are familiar with it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, so they're very Street Fighter-esque, but they're you play as a lot of famous pop culture kind of monsters, or kind of inspired by monsters. So Frankenstein's monster, and there's a Dracula character and a mummy character. There's even a little Red Riding Hood character, but they were really popular games in the 90s.
Is it an anime thing, is it?
Ish. It's got it looks like Street Fighter, but you play as monsters, essentially. But the Darkstalker series, there was actually 5 of them, throughout its lifetime. And all 5 of them are going to be coming to this collection. So you get Darkstalkers, Night Warriors, Vampire Savior, Vampire Hunter 2, and Vampire Savior 2. I love the naming of that, because they've all got little sub names. So it's Darkstalkers sub Night Warriors, but then the next game's called Night Warriors. So it's one of them ones where it's difficult to keep up with. But I don't believe they've ever been in one place at once, or at least kind of in a modern release. So that's really cool. You then also get a fighter called Red Earth, which is apparently the first time it's ever been on home consoles, because I've never heard of this game.
No, I'm not familiar with
and
that.
And that looks obviously these are all one-on-one kind of fighters, like Street Fighter. They're all, kind of beat 'em ups. But Red Earth looks kind of a little bit like a Conan the Barbarian, caveman. I can't really describe it. I don't know enough about it to talk about it enough, but I want to get my hands on it. It looks pretty cool. And there's Cyberbots. And then, of course, there is...
Was Cyberbots a Saturn game? Am I right?
I'm not too sure.
Right,
once again...
I think I got it on the Saturn.
Yeah, it might have been. But, I think all of these started as arcade games, and then obviously they've been ported. The Darkstalkers game is on the Saturn and on PlayStation and stuff like that. But it only says Red Earth is the only one that's never been ported to home consoles before. So you're probably right about Cyberbots. And then you get Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, Hyper Street Fighter 2, and then you get Super Gem Fighter Mini Mix. So quite a cool collection. And we know Capcom like to, kind of jump on these. I don't want to call it a cash grab, because it's pretty cool that they've got these different games on there for once, like Darkstalkers and Red Earth and stuff like that. But it's got all, the usual kind of features. It's got online play, obviously couch play, and then there's extra features on there. There's actually a training mode, and then there's obviously the museum in there as well, where you get kind of all the hand-drawn artwork and all the kind of the arcade cabinet artwork, which you unlock from playing the games. And there's 400 music tracks that you can unlock and listen to and stuff. So, they don't just chuck it out there on Xbox and go, give us your 15 quid or whatever. I don't know how much it is, but
probably more than 50.
Probably more than that, yeah, as Capcom. But it's nice.
It's full price.
It's nice that they do these things, and it's interesting, like I say, that it isn't just 8 Street Fighter games. They've kind of dug deep and put some other games on there. So I'm looking forward to this one as well.
It's cool though, because nothing makes me rage like a one-on-one fighting game and losing, which, out of all the genres of gaming, that's the one that frustrates me the most. When your friend's next to you and they absolutely kick your ass around.
Yeah, well, that's usually me with you.
Literally. This
not a Mortal Kombat, though.
No, yeah, true.
This is a total new area for me. I've not heard of any of these titles apart from Super Puzzle Fighter.
Well, surely you've heard of Street Fighter 2.
Yeah. Street Fighter 2. Yeah. But not Hyper Street Fighter 2. So these are all proper, mad arcade ones then.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Darkstalker games, there is a big fan base for them there, but I don't think they're anywhere near as mainstream as, Street Fighter. But, I like to see myself as quite a big fighting game enthusiast, and I've never heard of Red Earth and I've seen Cyberbots, but I've definitely never played it and don't know what it's been ported to and stuff. So, like I say, they've really dug deep for this one. And it's not it's they're running out of games because of the Darkstalker franchise. Like I say, it's a well-loved franchise. So looking forward to this one.
You know what, though? It's weird to me looking at the list because they've picked some very niche games on there, but there's no, like, I thought like X-Men versus Street Fighter or, the Marvel versus Capcom games might be on there, but
yeah.
And
it's interesting that you say that because if they haven't done a compilation of like the Marvel versus Street Fighter games or anything like that yet, as far as my knowledge goes, and, Capcom versus Marvel, I don't think they've done any big compilations of them or anything. Maybe they're keeping them in their back pocket for next time or something. But you were right about Cyberbots. It is a Sega Saturn game. Damn, okay. I had to check. Yeah. So it's a Japanese exclusive Sega Saturn game. So we did get it in the arcade in England, but not on console, not on PlayStation or Sega Saturn.
And if you got a hacked one like
yeah, there you go.
Because a lot of people are saying about this, they're like, oh yeah, Capcom, it's cool that they're doing a fighting collection, but where's Resident Evil? We want that.
Yeah, I know.
The focus off that.
In a lot of the articles, there's a lot of people crying out for the original Resident Evil trilogy to be, not even like remade, because obviously they've all like been remade now, but just put them out. Just put those ones out again. I'll buy them again for full price.
Some new news about Resident, because we keep hyping stuff like all these rumors.
Yeah.
As soon as you see a Capcom article, you're like, right, this is it, and then no, it's a fighting game. But, it does look cool though. So it's going to be out in June. Bit of a wait, but obviously we'll hear pricing and that before then, I'm sure. And if you want to check out the trailer, I'll stick that in the show notes too. Now, a game that's maybe a little bit forgotten by some people, but definitely a bit of a cult classic on the Nintendo 64. A game called Glover. And this is by the Oliver Twins then, was it? I didn't realise this was
the Oliver Twins. So originally it was by the Oliver Twins. It says that actually on the remake as you kind of look at the trailer. It's pretty interesting, Glover. Like, I remember seeing it, but not really playing it that much. And it was like N64 game, and it's being remade for modern PCs and improved, and like all the graphics have kind of been redone. But interesting concept, a kind of glove that has a personality and that can walk. And I don't know if this is a kind of connection to the Oliver Twins and Dizzy, because he's in a world called the Crystal Kingdom. And of course, there was a Crystal Kingdom Dizzy as well that came out.
It's a puzzle game then. So I've not played this one before. It looks like a mixture between kind of a platformer and a puzzle game.
Well, I think the idea is that you're this kind of glove character that's a bit of a platformer, but you can smash stuff. You can control these balls and like kind of basketball style, get it around. And
so pretty much it's a adventure puzzle platformer. And the idea,
all genres.
Yeah. The idea is
racer fighting.
The idea is, as Ravi says, you control the ball, and I think I've never played them, but I'm familiar with the game. I think you have to get the ball to the end of the level. That's the idea, but you kind of have to clear the path, if you will. Like clear the stage of enemies and clear the puzzles, so blocks move out the way and stuff like that. Interestingly, it looks like a really Japanese game. But then, like you say, it's by the Oliver Twins, and so it isn't. It's obviously, I'm assuming, a British game.
Yeah. I think it's kind of when they went into the PlayStation era, and a lot of these studios kind of improved and went 3D. But I love the simplicity of it. It feels like Monkey Ball or something to me, kind of, or Neverball.
Yeah, it looks like it would confuse me, because I'd want to think I'm controlling the ball, but you actually control the glove that's then smacking the ball about and stuff like that. So, but this comes out the 20th of April, and it's coming to Steam, and what else is it coming to COG as well, is it?
GOG, good old games. Dream Store as well. It's PC only. Interesting. Now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking,
looks
this
perfect
would be well
for
at
the
home
Switch.
On the Switch.
Yeah, 100%.
That's my first thought.
Yeah, especially with it being an N64 game. So
yeah, or maybe I don't know if they're going to put the original out on the the N64 emulator on there, maybe, or something.
Yeah,
or seems like they're missing a trick. I mean, it might just be PC first, and then maybe down the line, depending on how well it does, I imagine. But it looks a cool game, and obviously they got rid of all the kind of I'm looking at the original version side by side. On YouTube, they've got rid of all the blur vision and the fog and everything from the N64. It's a lot sharper and cleaner now. So interesting little concept.
Yeah, interestingly, it's coming out on 420 as well, which is quite interesting. And they asked Pico, and they said, "Why did you pick the day? The 20th of the 4th?" And they said, "Pick that day because it's a fun/funny date."
Fair enough.
So we're going to check out the trailer and everything we know about that so far. You'll find it all. And the rest of the stories, of course, I put them every week. Open your podcast app, look at the little show notes in there. You can scroll through them, or we put them all on our website at theretrohour.com. Save you Googling around. Now we're going to be chatting to the wonderful David Perry, the inside story on the Earthworm Jim games, Disney's Aladdin, what a game that was back in the day, Shiny Entertainment as well, and lots more. He's coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, you guys are probably sounding quite chilled out this week. You're off on holiday on Friday, Joe. Day this comes out, you'll be in the car, heading away for a week of relaxation. That said, you are going with your wife and the kid, maybe not so much relaxation.
And the in-laws and my sister-in-law.
Yeah, definitely not. You'll be ready for a holiday when you get back.
I'll be ready for a holiday when I get back, but I'm super, super excited for it. And I also need to make sure that I do look nice, prim and proper, because it is also the father-in-law's 60th birthday. It's going to be lots of photos. And there is a way that I can look that way, isn't there, Dan?
God, you're good at this.
Yeah, I'm getting all right at this.
This is our wonderful sponsor, our friends at Harry's. Now, you've probably heard us talking about Harry's before. The fact that they are, they're a super sharp razor company. The thing about Harry's is, though, they're actually more than that, because they want to revamp your whole routine. Now, everything from, close shaves to flake-free hair, and a way to give you nice, clear, healthy skin. Their mission is, Harry's want to help guys feel good. Now, because we're good mates with Harry's and we want you to try them out, maybe you've got a holiday coming up as well, we're giving you a chance to get a free travel-sized shower gel with a trial set and try out their other products as well. So, you can check out more than just a shave. So what you get in this trial set is you get the expertly engineered weighted handle, one 5-blade cartridge created by artisans in their own German factory, complete with a precision trimmer as well. You get the handy foaming shave gel for effective lubrication. You also get a travel blade cover for your adventures. Finally the world's starting to open up again. Maybe you've got so many people I'm talking to right now are saying, I'm going on holiday, I'm jumping on a plane for the first time in 2 years this summer, including me, and I know you're as well, Ravi, soon.
Yeah, I'm going to need a shave for sure. And this looks quite ideal. And it also comes with some shower gel as well, so I can have a wash.
You do, free shower gel. So your whole morning routine, you know what I love as well? Having a shave in the shower. How efficient is that? Then you can get out and enjoy your adventures as well. So we want you to get involved in this. Obviously, support the podcast by supporting our sponsors. Take up this offer. Now, all you have to do is cover the £3.95 for delivery, and you will get your own shower shave kit that you can take with you on your travels this summer. So head to this website, harrys.com/retro, to have your set delivered and start a shave plan, and your freebie is going to be added at checkout. So please check them out, and a big thank you to Harry's for their support of our show. Head to harrys.com/retro. Right, next we get the inside story on classics like Earthworm Jim, Aladdin, the story of Shiny Entertainment. Heading over to California to chat to this week's special guest, the wonderful David Perry, next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our favourite part of the show where we get to welcome on a very special guest, a veteran of the video games industry, and our guest today definitely deserves that title. He's worked on so many incredible games on so many different platforms as well. We're going to get into all that, but let's welcome him on the show first of all. Welcome, David Perry. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm in California right now. Where are you guys?
Oh, we're in Nottingham in the UK, so I imagine it's a bit warmer in California than it is here.
It's beautiful today. Yeah, it's sunny. You could get a suntan here.
You're not making us jealous. Well, I mean, going back to, pre-California, I know that you grew up in Northern Ireland. I mean, kind of going all the way back to the beginning. I mean, do you remember the first time that you encountered a video game, and what was that kind of early scene like when you were really young in Northern Ireland?
Well, when I was young, I was in school in Belfast, and they wouldn't let me actually have access to the computers. And as a kid, that's means that you really want access. So I first chance I got to get into that room, they sat me down in front of a ZX81, and I can't say that I was playing games. They were, they would make me just type in what is your name? And then it would say, hello, David, and things like that. That was enough to get me started. So, maybe that's the worst game ever, but that just getting you so that you can input something and see something back, you start having ideas of what, maybe I could do an adventure game or something like that. But I basically, with that little ZX81, my mother ended up buying me one for home. And I started making games on it. I mean, games are just so much more fun than anything else you could do. So it was at the time, everything was being sold through magazines. So it was such a great way to learn how to type, because I didn't own a cassette player. So I couldn't actually, I couldn't save anything. So if I typed in a game, I could play it, but then I'd have to, at some point, turn off the machine, and then I'd have to start again. So it was such a great way to learn how to type games in. But at that point, I wasn't really buying games, so everything I was playing was just from whatever was in a magazine, and they were all pretty basic, to be honest, because you're typing the things in. But back then you had no internet, you had no TikTok, and so based on doing in those, the way in America they call it chores. What do they call it in England? I've forgotten the name of it. When you're
kind of like things you need to do around the house, like chores. Yeah,
you do that, or do you play games? Games win every single time.
In the schools, did they have lots of Spectrums and stuff like that? Was that the kind of setup there? And was there a book that was essential, or were you just totally going out of magazines?
Well, it was magazines to start, and then there was this book came out from Dr. Ian Logan, and he did some incredible books on teaching you how to program, and there were some other people as well. But in school, what happened was I happened to be at the right place at the right time. So the government put a whole bunch of computers in our school. And think about that. The teachers don't know how to use these things, and they don't have the time to work it out, but we do. So there were actual situations where I was sitting at the front of the class teaching the class, and the teacher was sitting in the front row. I kid you not. And it's because we learned how to use the stuff really quickly. But behind the scenes, there were a few other people that were actually doing they were pretty interested in games too. And so I've always found that you can learn faster when there's other people interested. If you're into something and someone else is into that thing, you somehow riff off each other and you learn even faster. And so that's what we were doing. But yeah, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Computers became a thing. The school supported it. I was ended up getting interviewed by the BBC, in school, because they were interested in this idea that kids had access to computers. So it was actually an interesting subject to them at that time. Nowadays, they could care less, but those days that was a brand new thing. These little kids are working and programming computers in school.
Well, I know you started publishing your own games through magazines. I mean, how did that kind of work?
Well, yeah, what happens is you can imagine you're doing this and you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I wonder if they would print one of my games. And so I sent my games off, and, finally this check shows up in the mail, and I kind of went, wait, what? You can be paid to do this? This is, you actually make money doing this? And then I thought, my goodness, I could be doing an awful lot more games. I have a lot more bandwidth because I don't need to sleep. So I will stay up and just keep typing, and then once you start making money that way, because if you think about it, I had nothing to spend it on other than sweets, and so it was like I became like I had a backpack of sweets everywhere I went because I was making these games. But what was fun was the industry started to change a little, because I was in Northern Ireland, which is not really where the video game industry was. It was more in the United Kingdom. And so if you think about it, it was a little harder to get any traction there. So I found myself printing games in magazines, which was fun. But then ultimately one of the publishers reached out to me. It was this guy called Tim Hartnell. And he reached out to me and said, look, I'm doing a book. Would you like to do a chapter in the book? And so I ended up getting a chapter. And then he ended up coming back and saying, look, I'd like to do a book with you that's going to be put into all the sort of W.H. Smiths and, the high street stores. And that was kind of fun. So I did that.
That's pretty amazing at that age. And I was just wondering, in Belfast, were there any computer game shops or arcades or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The arcade, the one with the good machines was the airport. I had to go all the way to the airport to play like Star Wars, because they had one. They had Dragon's Lair, which was also cool. There was a place that I found near my school that I could walk down to that was a bar that they didn't seem to mind us coming into, that had Pac-Man and bumping buggies or whatever that one was, the one where you jump the car. It was so much fun. But so basically, I had access, but not great. And then we discovered that there was a university near us, and they had this sort of common room where you could go to. And of course, we weren't supposed to be going in there, but we just snuck in, and they had Phoenix, Donkey Kong Country, and Missile Command. So, that's pretty good, right? That meant, I'm in Ireland, but I got access to some decent arcade games for the time.
On Phoenix was incredible. I remember getting to that end level and you'd have to kind of shoot through that little band to get to the alien in the UFO. Oh, the hours I spent on that game.
I still have so much nostalgia for that stuff. I mean, I love Phoenix. Yeah. So yeah, it was. The joke really was in the joke I tell here in California is that in Ireland they say it only rained twice this week, once for 3 days and once for 4 days. In reality, as you know, the weather isn't that great, especially in Northern Ireland. But it meant that I did get a lot of time indoors, and so I got a lot of time playing games. And you can imagine when you're playing games and thinking to yourself, I could. Imagine you've just typed the game in and it says lives equal 5. You can say to yourself, I wonder what would happen if I changed that, to lives equals 10, and you play and boom, you've got 10 lives. And so you start to, in a way, hack the game. You're starting to learn how they're structured. It takes away the mystery. Now, this is not the case for people in America who are buying, consoles with just joysticks on them, because they didn't ever get to see the code. So they never typed anything in. They were plugging in cartridges and playing. So in a way, I felt very lucky that our experience through the Sinclair machines was always keyboard based and always touching and looking at code. I think it was very helpful to those bedroom coders at that point. It definitely got me started.
Yeah, I think there's a whole generation that probably got started, even just like on the Commodore 64 as well, like peeking and poking into RAM to see what you could change on screen and change the games.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally do anything. And so what happened anyway, long story short, was I thought I knew what I was doing, and I got offered a job to leave school. So I never even finished school, to leave school and go over to England and work for Microgen. And at that time, I thought I knew what I was doing, but when I arrived there, I realized I didn't know at all how professional real games were actually created. And so I had this emergency situation, whereas I need to learn this really fast or they're going to work this out. And I'm going to get sent back to school, right? So it became like this emergency. There was a guy there, Chris Hinsley, who was really good. And I got to look at his code. And it was at the time, it was like drinking through a fire hose. Literally, the amount of information I was trying to download, but getting to see how real games worked was a complete unlock for me. And I was lucky because one of the first tasks the first real task they gave me was to take his game, which was Pyjamarama, which was cool at the time, and take that over to the Amstrad CPC. And doing that, it meant that I got to see the code, and it also meant that my first game got like 10 out of 10 because it was a good game in the first place for its time. And so, yeah, learning from other people, that was just so critical. And so I made it. I survived. They didn't throw me out of the building, and I got to stay and make more games.
That move from Northern Ireland over to England. So I was reading that and you wanted to be a Concorde pilot when you were a kid, and your mum wanted you to be a dentist. So obviously that was quite a big change. I mean, how did you kind of convince your mum to let you do this?
Yeah, my mom at one point worked in a dental office, and I wasn't excited about that. She ended up working for British Airways, and so as a kid, I was always fascinated by being a pilot. That was the thing, and it turns out I'm 6'8". And 6'8" is actually a problem. I didn't realize this at the time. So I got a chance to go and sit in the cockpit of Concorde, and I couldn't. And the reason I couldn't is because it's not designed for people that are 6'8". I just didn't fit. And so it was like the best day. Imagine how great a day that is. You're going to go sit in the cockpit of Concorde and you want to be a pilot, and that's the dream pilot job. And then you realize because of your physical body, it's not going to happen. They're not going to change Concorde ever for taller pilots. So that was a bit disappointing. I remember coming away just shaking my head going, woe is me. So what am I going to be now? The game thing, again, long story short, there's a guy who talks a lot about, or he's passed away now, but he used to talk about finding your element and how hard it is for people to work out what they're built for. They end up doing what their family did because it's just easier than trying to work it out what you're actually built for. But people are built for something. And I think in a way the game industry found me more than I found it, if you know what I mean. It's something that just fits, and you become dangerous because you would do it for free. And I think that's a really good sign that you've found something that you like, is because that makes you hard to compete with if you're willing to work for free. And
I guess you must have been into flight simulators as well.
Oh my God, yeah. Scion Flight Simulator is so crap, but I loved it. like there's some dots, and in my mind that's the world. I see dots moving around, and it was not. And I still, like, even today, I downstairs I have a whole rig set up. I have Boeing controls and everything for Microsoft's Flight Simulator, which is finally back, which makes me happy. But yeah, no, I love all that. Years ago, when I came to America, I bought a sort of a video that said how to be a pilot. And the guy in the video said, if you want to be a pilot, stop watching this video and go book a lesson, which I thought was hilarious. So I did. And I reached out to different flight schools, but one of them on the list was actually a helicopter school. And they ended up calling me up and saying, what are you doing for lunch? And I'm like, well, I'm eating my sandwich. And the guy goes, do you want to fly a helicopter? And so I said, sure. And I went to the airport and he took me up, and he did that perfect sales pitch on me. So when you're a gamer, usually your hand-eye coordination's good. And so he's like, you've got really good hand-eye coordination. I think it would be so easy to teach you. It won't even take very long. And I'm, of course, eating all this up. I'm sure he says this to everybody, but I'm eating it up. And I ended up signing up and learning how to fly helicopters instead of airplanes, which was kind of weird. But it's, helicopters are cool too. So, this is something that it's kind of great how video games have evolved, because the flight simulators these days, like the Microsoft one, is incredible.
Yeah, you can live out your dreams in that.
Totally.
Yeah, you also wrote 3 Weeks in Paradise.
What happened with 3 Weeks in Paradise? So imagine I've just done Pajamarama. I now know how code works. I'd been given one more, like, hey, why don't you try making a game? And I made this thing starring a baby, which, interestingly, it was called Herbert's Dummy Run, and it was part of the series. But what was funny was that I ended up making a game starring a baby, which is about the dumbest thing you can do if you know that the audience is mostly male and somewhat hardcore. And, hey, I've got a game where you get to play as a baby. And what's so funny? I did the same thing again many, many years later, making a game called Messiah. And in Messiah, you play a baby, and it was like, well, what is wrong with us? Like, we're trying to get, the first person shooter audience to play a game starring a baby. It was a bad move. But yeah, after that came, after that Herbert game, there was 3 Weeks in Paradise. So there was a little secret to that, which was there was a limited amount of space to put your games on the Spectrum. And there was a guy in our office, Andy Laurie, who was a bit of an electronics whiz, and he worked out how to actually create a little cartridge that you could plug into the back of a Spectrum, and it would give us more memory than anybody else. So it would be a completely unfair thing for a normal game developer to compete against us, because we had more memory than they did. And the idea was that when you buy your game, you would get this little plug-in dongle thing that would plug into the back of your Spectrum. And so 3 Weeks in Paradise was actually built for that. And it was kind of fascinating because I built the game knowing I had more room. But there was another game called The Shadow of the Unicorn that was made by someone else in the office, and he got to launch first. And so he launched first with this thing. It was called the Microgen Micro Plus, which was these little device. And boy, those are rare. I don't even have one. I got to hunt one of those down. But that device, it ended up, that game wasn't successful. And so the managing director of Microgen just came over to me one day and he said, you're not getting the extra memory. And so I'm like, wait, what? Are you kidding me? This is impossible. And so I ended up having to take the game and just hack and slay bits of it out to get it back to normal size. But what actually occurred was that the game, I think, got better because of it. I think you cut out the weaker parts and keep the best bits. And in a way, the whole thing became more potent. I think I learned a lesson from that. And that game was very well reviewed and did very well for Microgen. So
yeah, sometimes less is more, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, how did you start working with Probe Software?
So imagine you're with Microgen and everything's good. I'm trying to remember at one point they came up to me, like I think it was 3 Weeks in Paradise. It was selling really well, and at the time, the managing director came up to me and he's like, this is doing really good. And he opens up his wallet and gives me like £100 out of his wallet. and it's funny because that I find sometimes you have to be careful, because if you try to motivate somebody saying, here's £100, in reality, what you're actually doing is demotivating, because you know that the product is so much bigger than that. Like it's running the company, that's your core product. And at the time it was just, I was thinking to myself, look, I think I can build my own company and do this myself. And I don't really know if I want to stay here. And so I had finished one game, which was Stainless Steel was a game I'd made there. And then I finally exited. And what happened was you can imagine now you're at home on your own, no company, no salary, and you've got to work it all out. And I was doing some things for Elite Gaming, which was at the time a pretty cool company. And then what happened was I got this chance to go and meet Fergus McGovern, who sadly passed away now, but Fergus was running Probe Software, and I went in and met him. And they were making a game called Trantor: The Last Stormtrooper. And the lead artist on it is a guy called Nick Broody, and Nick was a freaking Jedi. And so I thought, this is my opportunity. So they said, why don't you make that on the Amstrad? We already have it being made on the Spectrum, so why don't you do it on Amstrad? So what actually happened was Nick and I ended up finishing the Amstrad version before the Spectrum version. So we kind of pulled away and completed the game. Right. And then Nick said, I want to work with you, so let's form a team. And that became, we worked out of my mother's house, and we set up like a room with benches, and we just, it turned it into a little studio. And that's where we made games like the Terminator and, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and things like that. So, we were able to just kick the games out really quite quickly. And Probe loved it. So they loved that relationship of, I need something done, these guys will get it done.
And it seemed to last a long time. Like, I don't want to jump forward, but you guys both worked on Earthworm Jim, didn't you? Because he was on our podcast as well, and singing your praises. Yeah, a really good guy.
Nick is incredible, super, super talented.
Well, you also worked on, as you mentioned, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that was such a huge franchise back there. Turtle Mania, was there kind of a lot of pressure?
Yeah, I kind of joke because in England they censor it to Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles because the word ninja is just too scary for kids. And I always like the Spanish version, Tortugas Ninja, which is cooler. But no, what happened was I got to make this game that really taught me the power of branding. So by putting the Turtles name on your game, suddenly you're number one, like your game's number one in the charts, and everybody wants to work with you. And so my career really, really jumped every time I got involved with something with a brand on it. And I think that was so enlightening at the time. Nick and I once made a game together. We were just, riffing and came up with this idea for something called Crazy Jet Racer. And the media started to pick it up. And what happened was Virgin came to us and said, we have the rights to Dan Dare 3. And Dan Dare, as you know, is was a British comic book. And so Dan Dare was a license. And here we were trying to create something with no license. And we just agreed to do it. And we renamed the game and sort of made it into Dan Dare 3. And as a result, I think it actually worked better, and it introduced us to Virgin. So now we suddenly have a relationship with Virgin Games, and they ended up wanting to do more with us. So this was the one thing that's interesting is in the game industry, things keep changing. So, and it's in a weird way. So suddenly you're used to working on the Spectrum, and then someone says, "Can you make something for the Commodore 64?" And you're like, "Oh, but that's a whole new language," and then you go learn that language, and then along comes the Mega Drive, and it's a whole new language again, or the Amiga or the Atari ST. You're constantly having to learn new languages. Can you imagine that in real life if you were doing business and then you had to sort of learn Russian, and then you had to learn French, and then you had to learn Spanish? It's kind of crazy. And it wasn't that you had to learn that new language and sort of survive. You had to be an absolute expert at that language, right? So you had to be great at it. And so I found that very interesting, how we had to keep adapting. But yeah, the Virgin relationship became very, very important in my career. And we ended up making a game called Supremacy for them on the Amiga. And it was also on the Atari ST. In the United States, it was called Overlord. And that was kind of cool because that was a real-time strategy game, which we were sort of working out as we went along. How do you even make a real-time strategy game? What is that? But that was really fun. And ultimately, Virgin came back and said, look, we have the rights to the Terminator with Orion Pictures, James Cameron's first Terminator movie. Would you like to make the game? And we got very excited about that. You can imagine Nick and I were like, oh, this is going to be so great because we're going to be the Terminator and go around and try to catch Sarah Connor. And they said to us, but you can't be the Terminator because we don't have the rights to Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so then we said, no problem, we'll be Linda Hamilton. So we'll be Sarah Connor. And they said, no, we don't have the rights to Linda Hamilton. So then we're like, well, who do we play in this game? And they said, you have to play Kyle Reese, the guy that dies in the movie that falls in love with Sarah. Sorry for the spoilers there.
It's only been nearly 40 years. It will be okay.
All these years, I hope you've seen the Terminator. So anyway, it was just funny because and this has actually helped me in my career, because when I talk to directors, it's like, don't ever limit the game. Just don't do that. You have to think about how to license things so that you can make the game all it can be. And because this is a recurring theme, you'll see over time there was a lot of that going on. And so anyway, long story short, this was really a fun time to get to make the Terminator. But what happened was then Virgin called me up and said, look, we have a game over in America that we're making for McDonald's that we have to get done. And we want you to get on a plane and fly to America. And we want you to, whatever you're earning today, we'll pay you more. We'll give you royalties, whatever you need. Just get on a plane and come work on this game. And so that was kind of fun because I was single at the time. So imagine you're sitting in Egham in Surrey. You think that's where the rest of your life is going to be spent. And then someone out of the blue says, come to California. So I'm like, okay, I'll go. And it ended up, Virgin was set up in a place called Irvine. I didn't even know what Irvine was. I'm like, I thought I was going to Los Angeles, but I ended up in this. It's like Silicon Valley on the south, in Southern California, and right next door was Blizzard, and Interplay. You have all these cool companies were right there, and so we ended up making this Terminator game and getting it out, and then we made the McDonald's game, which was the one that they really wanted me to get out the door. And that one, the McDonald's executives showed up one day to see it, and they absolutely hated it. And so we were kind of laughing because, they wanted Ronald McDonald in the game, but we hated Ronald McDonald, so we didn't. And in the end, they insisted, so we sort of snuck him in here and there, like waving a flag.
I think every kid was frightened of Ronald McDonald, but I knew.
Yeah, hated him. So they ended up, we shipped the game, and the game won Game of the Year. and all kinds of other awards, best music, best graphics. As a result, McDonald's went and made another game starring Ronald McDonald called McDonald Land, and that one got panned because the articles were like, Ronald Frightwig McDonald is in this game. So we felt vindicated, but it was good because you can imagine you get Game of the Year on your first game on U.S. soil. They said, please stay, like, please don't leave. And I wasn't thinking of leaving, but my house in England was full of cobwebs at that point, which was kind of an interesting problem. You can imagine there's no one taking care of it. It was just sitting there. I locked the door and went to the airport. So I had to make at some point a decision. I made another game, which was called Cool Spot with 7-Up.
Yes.
And Cool Spot was fun. I kind of look back at this and I'm like apologizing to the industry because we were some of the first people doing advert gaming where, McDonald's starts with the McDonald's M. And Cool Spot starts with him surfing in on a 7-Up bottle. So adverts in gaming really sort of began. But
kind of advert games, weren't they?
Yeah, like in your face, you're playing, their mascots.
And out of all the characters, I think, and all the games, Cool Spot was a pretty decent one, actually. And, that kind of surprised a lot of people with those advertising titles.
Yeah, you'd think they would just be the worst games ever, right? And so, we had a lot of fun making it. And what actually occurred is we started to build a team. So you saw a team coming together through the McDonald's game, through the 7-Up game. And then they came to us and said, would you be willing to do Aladdin? And Aladdin was going to require serious animation chops. And our team, after the people we happened to have on Cool Spot, the lead was a guy called Mike Dietz and another guy, Ed Schofield. Those guys were really, really talented. So Disney, however, threw a curveball at us saying, what can we do for you to help you? So instead of like the Terminator where you can't do this and you can't do that, this was Jeffrey Katzenberg was involved, and he basically said, what can Disney do to help? And so, of course, the answer was we wanted the authentic music. We wanted real animation done by Disney Feature Animation in Florida. And they just like, yep, what else do you need? Wait, what? We're going to get that?
Which must have been remarkable because, I imagine in, those years leading up to that, it kind of felt like generally games were kind of regarded by companies as a bit throwaway and maybe, not even as important as a toy. But then it suddenly got to this era and suddenly they realized it was a big part of the franchise, I guess.
Exactly. So what happened is you would be I'd been into Disney licensing, and you're like sitting in a room with coffee cups and things like that with Disney characters on them. Like that's where licensing happens. And they thought video games were just like a coffee cup. There was nothing that important. And in certain cases, some of the executives making the decisions had no interest in games. Like they were just too old. And so it took a while. I used to enjoy this because I'd go into these meetings looking at these older executives thinking, you don't care about this industry. You're not going to support this. No one's going to say yes. But what happens is over time, those people move on. And you see the people moving in are all, they have kids playing games. They love games. They grew up playing games, and it changed everything. That just literally just right before my eyes in all of my Hollywood meetings, I watched the whole industry change and start really embracing video games. And so people like Jeffrey Katzenberg, I think, were way ahead of the crowd because they really understood. And so, to give you a crazy example, is I got invited to the press release, I guess, for the press announcement for Aladdin, and it was at the CES show in which is this sort of big place. There was a lot of I think about 1,000 press were invited to it, and I went. And I arrived and I went to the wrong floor in the elevator, and the elevator doors open, or the lift, as you would say in England. The lift doors open, and imagine the whole floor of the hotel is filled with Aladdin characters.
Wow.
And I'm like, holy shit, what is this? Because I mean, we'd never had something like this for a video game. And so you go in this room, there's 1,000 press there. You have Jeffrey Katzenberg on stage. You have Richard Branson on stage. You have the head of Sega has flown in from Japan, and all these people, that I respected greatly. And then they did this big presentation. Then the doors open and in come all these characters. And it sort of gives you a taste of what it's like to work with Disney. They think big, and that was a huge hit, that game, for us. They ended up making, like, the Mega Drive. They had their own box, like the Aladdin box, where you had the Aladdin edition and things like that. So it was a wonderful thing to experience. And it also meant that when I went, I got special access to Disneyland and all kinds of benefits from being involved. And then Jeffrey Katzenberg called me up one day and said, "Would you like to do Lion King?" And in my infinite wisdom, I said no.
Oh.
Suddenly I'm not welcome at Disneyland. Suddenly it's all over, right? But what happened was, at the time, I was thinking about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles again. There was a long story short on that one. I had made the game, yes, but it turns out that the toys were made by a company in America called Playmates, and they had made like $1 billion just on those toys. And so they wanted to get in the game industry, and they asked me, would I be willing to leave Virgin and work for them and help them build their own video game wing. At the same time, Sega Technical Institute. So Sega, the games like Sonic and things like that came out of Sega were done there. And so I would have got to work with Yuji Naka, the Sonic guy, if I had have gone with the Sega offer. Or I could, of course, just have stayed at Virgin and worked on Lion King. So I had to weigh these all up, and I decided that I would take a different choice, which was I went back to Playmates and said, I don't really want to build your company. I want to build my own, but would you be willing to fund it? And they said, sure. And the understanding was that we'd probably end up making some kind of licensed games that relate to their toys. But what happened was we pitched them Earthworm Jim, and they really liked it. So we ended up building Earthworm Jim. And that was really interesting because that led us on a path of, instead of licensing in someone else's brand, with Earthworm Jim, we actually owned the brand. And we got it won Game of the Year as well. And it ended up becoming a toy line and a television show and Halloween masks and lunch baskets and all kinds of different, all these different things.
It was kind of a huge title, but also like going back to those kind of Disney days, like when they entered the industry, and especially the animation on Aladdin, it was amazing. I remember the animation studio came out, which was also a paint program, and it was like the reaction of gaming fans and around the industry was like, okay, Disney's entered. They've done this really high level animation. It looks like a Disney game and a Disney film, you know. Did you feel that kind of impact with those games and other people's reactions when it came out? Because there were ports of all different systems and they all look fantastic.
Yeah, what happened was I remember this is actually a different thing which I talk about when I'm talking about business, but I find that learning about different things is really important. For example, with podcasting, I want to understand everything about podcasting, so at a technical level. It was the same with Aladdin. As when we started to get the Disney animation in, the animators would say to me, you seem to really care about our animation. And I'm like, of course I do. I really care. And we would, I would take the time and sitting with them, they would be like, can you try changing this and that? And they would be, the timing of frames of animation, if you get it right, look really good. And if you get it wrong, it looks glitchy. And so being willing to take the time to make it look right is something that an animator really appreciates. And it's the same thing with the music. Actually caring that the music sounds good is interesting because you have to give up more resources in the console. You're basically saying, I'm going to give you more room because I want it to sound good, instead of
and it had lyrics on it as well, didn't it? On the Aladdin one, I remember it was singing a whole new world when you kind of loaded it up. You know?
It was a really, really interesting problem because Disney thought that the story mattered in Aladdin. And this was a learning that we had. You know, for example, Once Upon a Time in Agrabah, does that matter? And so we ran a test with a bunch of kids, and they were in a room, and we were looking through mirrored glass, and so you have these people that are. It was really funny thinking about it. They were all pressing their thumbs like, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, trying to move as fast as they possibly could through the through the story to get to the gameplay. So imagine you say, okay, everyone, let's go. And then the thumbs are going and they're just bouncing through the story as fast as they possibly can to get to gameplay. And there was one girl who read all the story. So we pulled her out saying, you know, why did you read the story? And she said, because I thought there would be something important in there and there wasn't. She was annoyed by it. But you see, that's the thing. Because I for years have been getting into those conversations, how important is story in a video game? And there are people that think the story is by far the most important part of a video game. And I disagree. I think the gameplay and, you know, the story is really about you and what you do in the game. For that to me is more important than forcing people to read a whole bunch of text and try to you know.
And when you couldn't skip it, it was so frustrating as a kid.
Yeah, do you remember that?
When you
some games would, or they spend a bunch of time doing some rendered video and they make you watch it over and over because they want you to see the work they did. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that stuff. But yeah, no, we had a lot of fun with Aladdin, and it ended up doing really well. And the without a doubt, the animation was. I felt, again, it was unfair competition. Can you imagine trying to be an animator and animating against Disney?
Yeah, not going to happen.
Good luck with that
one. Well, as you mentioned, you know, in '93, you set up Shiny Entertainment. I mean, what was kind of the process of forming your own company? And where did the name come from as well? It's always been, you know, very positive kind of name.
Yeah, we couldn't actually think of a name. So I was at Mike Dietz' house one day, and we were listening. The radio had REM sung Shiny Happy People, and we ended up just saying, oh, that sounds good. Let's go with Shiny. We didn't realize that about 50% of the population spells shiny wrong, so they put an E in it. And so that was not good. You know, once you have a website, we didn't have the one with the E in it. But the name ended up, I think, working well because it was kind of silly, like, you know, shiny, because we had that attitude of shiny, happy people behind the scenes. So, and something that was going on in our office, which was kind of fun, was we had cartoons playing 24/7. So we had Tex Avery cartoons as inspiration. So imagine you have laser discs, and the laser discs are playing these cartoons back to back. That, I think, helped inspire Earthworm Jim a lot, is this slapstick humor. It's something I say to students today. If you're a student thinking about getting into video games, please don't make a first-person shooter. You're just going to get lost in the noise. And it's really hard to make one that's in any way different from what's been done before. So go for humor. Do something funny. There's so few games where you're laughing as you're playing. So, you know, if you get an opportunity to make a game, try humor. You'll see it's like in the movie industry. Humor works there too. So it's one of those things that I think we all embrace. I think we all enjoy something that's funny. And then you go back to your flight simulator.
Well, I think you're right there because, you know, Earthworm Jim, he felt like, you know, it could be a Warner Brothers cartoon. It reminded me a bit of something like, you know, the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, that kind of thing. And, you know, there was a lot of kind of cutesy platformers before then. And obviously it seemed like Jim had a lot of attitude as well. How did the character kind of form then? And those ideas to make him like an earthworm, for example, where did that all come from?
Well, what happened was we had this guy who applied for a job with us through one of the animators. His name was Doug Tenaple, and Doug wanted to come and be a part of our team. So we wanted to give him a test, and his submission for his test was Earthworm Jim. And we looked at it and thought, what is this? Earthworm in a cybernetic suit? That's fantastic. At the time, we were being funded by a toy company. Now imagine on my right hand, we've got this Earthworm in a cybernetic suit. And on my left hand, we've got things like Knight Rider, the TV show. And so I'm like, Knight Rider isn't that exciting to us. We can have a lot of fun with this thing. And then he kept going and he created characters like Professor Monkey for a head, where you have this guy with a monkey and his head, or the two heads are combined. So he's like a mad scientist. I love this stuff. And so I was all in on going with the wacky character. Now, it turns out gameplay wise, this was something that we had done in that second baby game that I talked about with Messiah. The reason we had made a game with a baby is because the concept was that you go from weak to strong. This is a cool gameplay mechanic. When imagine you're really tough and you're kicking everyone's butt, but then suddenly you lose all that firepower and you're on, you have to run. That's what happened with Earthworm Jim. Is you're in this cybernetic suit, you've got a plasma blaster, you can charge that up, and then suddenly it's all taken away from you, and you're a naked worm, and everything hurts. That's a fun gameplay mechanic, and so I found myself in a way going back to that over time. I think that's a fun thing where you feel really tough and then feel really weak. It's a fun thing to play with.
And the level design, the kind of platform element was completely like turned on its head, and having different sequences as well, like flying through the kind of tunnely section, and the different like levels of climbing. It was really well designed and thought about.
The way it was actually done was we did it without a design document, so the game it's something that I still think if I make another game, which I hope to someday, I hope to do it the same way, which was we would jump around as the character and say, does that feel right? And adjust it until it feels right. And then and in a way that determines how far you can jump or what you can do. And so in a way, the game is designing itself. You get an idea for, we're going to be in a glass orb underwater. Okay, well, what does that feel like? And how big is the space? I don't know. We're going to work it out. How big does the orb need to be? And how fast would it move? And you just start building it. And then we in the office are playing it over and over, just going, this feels good. This feels good. And then we're like, no, it's too hard. It's too hard. And then someone completes it and he goes, no, you can complete it. And then we're like, really? Like, that seems so hard. And then they do it over and over and over. And okay, fair enough. You can complete it. And it's hard to explain, but you can't write that down. You can't have a document that tells you all of that, where someone has all those numbers or has that all thought out. And so in later games, sometimes people have asked me to consult on their games. So I've got to be a fly on a wall, seeing somebody else make a game. I once worked on The Simpsons, for example. And when you get to see other teams work, it's interesting because sometimes they have worked it all out on paper. And what happens is when the game gets made, then in a way, there's no time to fix the things that the gamers are saying. So, you would see a gamer complain about something, and instead of saying, oh, better fix that, they would say, oh, they're not a good gamer. And it's like, wait, what? Do you not hear what they're saying? Like, we got to fix that. That's like because the camera's wrong or something. Well, we're not changing the camera system, so therefore it must be them. And that's a problem when you have large teams and it costs a lot of money and you've just got to get the game done. So I kind of loved those days when you would be like, sure, no problem, I can fix that, and then you just go and fix it.
I guess it's kind of like the indie game scene now, with the kind of innovation and stuff of a smaller team. Like, one of the levels that blew my mind was the soil level with the kind of destructible environment. And I think it was like one of the first times I'd actually seen that properly really well done in a game. Was that a tough challenge to program?
Yeah, so I had this, that was actually my secret weapon. Was I had this engineer, his name was Andy Astor, and Andy was basically just this guy who was just an unbelievable engineer that could do anything. Didn't matter what it was. And so I would say to him, look, I need to find a better way to compress all this animation, because we need to get a lot of animation into our games. So, let's try to find a way to do this. And we ended up designing a tool to do the compression, and he wrote the tool. And it was fun because I thought, you can imagine that means I've pigeonholed him in my brain as being a tool maker guy. But it turns out when we were making Earthworm Jim 2, he was like, can I take a go at this? Can I try this? And I'm like, well, of course. But it turned out he was awesome. So he did that Lorenzo soil level where the soil all comes down. It's actually quite hard to do. And it was the kind of thing that just watching him start to actually work on a game and then to actually do really hard things with it really impressed me. And so Andy went from being the tool guy to like full team member, game coder, and he was awesome. So very, very helpful. In a way, the more he took on, the more, this was on Earthworm Jim 2, the more he took on, the more I started to think, hey, I'm going to move over to the dark side of the force and become management and start growing this team.
It really pushed the Mega Drive. That did, like, a lot of the features. I remember when it came out, it was a bit later in the life of the Mega Drive, and it was like, wow, you could do this.
Even mini games and stuff in it, didn't it? I remember, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those Nintendo Game & Watch games, so I think some of those games are kind of fun for inspiration. There was a level in Earthworm Jim where you're bouncing puppies across a screen, and that's actually comes from the idea of a game called Fire. That's a little Nintendo Game & Watch game where you have people jump out of a building and you're trying to get them across the space. And so we were very inspired by other things, but in reality, they would make fun mini games within the game. And so that was fun too, just trying different ideas.
Well, as you mentioned before, Jim, he became so iconic. He got his own animated TV series, of which there were 2 series of that. I mean, how did that kind of come about? And was Shiny involved with the making of it at all? And what did you think of it?
TV series was an interesting concept because, again, you're licensing out. This is our property. So for us to be going that direction was really weird. But you can't actually get a TV series because they want you to have some kind of really serious marketing budget for your property. And we wanted to do toys because we were with a toy company, and they said we can't do toys unless there's TV. And so we're like, this is interesting. So how about we all have dinner and we'll do a deal. And the deal was that we would do the games, you do the toys, and you do the TV. And if everyone does that, there's enough marketing to make the whole thing worthwhile. And so that's what we actually did. And Universal Cartoon Studios decided to make the TV show. That was just fascinating to see that entire process of what it's like to make a video game, into a TV show and all of the steps. And then seeing the promotion of it, like I got invited to Universal, and they it made me laugh. I think they had a poster up somewhere of Earthworm Jim. Like they put him up somewhere. And that tram ride that you do at Universal Studios where they have the shark and all this stuff that you have to see. They talked about Earthworm Jim as part of that ride, but they didn't have any Earthworm Jim props or anything. I thought it was hilarious. They're just trying to slip it in. Oh, is that Earthworm Jim over there? And there's nobody.
Blink and you miss it.
It's just an earthworm on the floor.
It was just so funny. But anyway, long story short, that was a great time getting to see, the making of that. And we ended up getting offered a movie deal, but the movie deal was with Sony, and Universal wouldn't give up the rights. So we never got to do the Earthworm Jim movie. But at the time, it was definitely, we ended up getting in America, you have fast food restaurants like Carl's Jr. and Del Taco, of course, McDonald's. But we ended up getting the equivalent of a Happy Meal, like you're the toy in the bag, and you're you're on their actual bag that they give to kids. And we did that with Del Taco and with Carl's Jr. here in the US. So you just started to see Earthworm Jim all over the place. It was really interesting, that whole process.
Well, obviously there was a big change in the industry in the mid-90s, particularly when the PlayStation arrived. Everything suddenly had to become 3D graphics. I mean, how did Shiny adapt to that then, that big change in, graphical style?
Well, that was a nightmare for me. So I'm in an office with people with pencils in their hands, and I'm like, we're going 3D. I'm going to start buying Silicon Graphics computers, which were $25,000 a time. And so I was spending a lot of money on the hardware and software that you need for 3D. And the team didn't want to do it. They weren't interested. In America, they have this bumper sticker that says, "You can take my gun from my cold dead hand." And that's basically the way it was with the animators. Like, you can take my pencil from my cold dead hand. I'm not going to start doing 3D. And that was an interesting problem because the industry seemed to be going that direction, and I was very worried about it. And, you know, you can imagine what happened. You know, that engineer, Andy Astor, that I told you about? 3D? That's no problem. I got this. He's like, what's the problem? Like, I can do 3D. And off he goes and starts doing 3D. And then we hired in another engineer. His name was it Michael Brownlow? And he joined, and he was incredible as well. And so suddenly we made a game, MDK. Do you remember MDK by any chance?
Yeah, third-person shooter. Yeah, good game.
Yeah, which was the first game with the sniper rifle. So we were excited about this new mechanic of having a sniper rifle in a game. And so, you know, you could shoot something in the eye from a mile away. How cool would that be? And so this game, MDK, started to come about, and we realized, you know what? I think we're going to survive this move to 3D. And so we realized something really quite interesting, which was this idea that you would be able to sell a game through devices instead of directly to consumers. So what that meant was when the iMac came out, you know, the very first Apple iMac, it had a game pre-installed, which was MDK, and it also, you know, NVIDIA, I think it was 3DFX at the time, actually. 3DFX were packaging in MDK. If you bought joysticks from Microsoft, it had MDK with it. Certain computers had it installed as well. So ultimately, you know, everywhere you went at the time, MDK was being installed. And we also, at the time, because 3D was a new thing, everyone was trying to work out, is this a good 3D computer or is this a lame one? How would you know the difference? So Andy, being Andy, said, I'll come up with a score, which we can use to help you work out if it's a good computer. And we just gave it a score of like 0 to 100 was the plan. And it was really funny because at that time, when you get reviews of computers, they were super technical about burst read write speeds and all of this stuff. And consumers don't understand that. And so to say this computer is a 73 and that's a 92, that was actually very easy for the public to understand. And so magazines started to actually use that as their way of reviewing hardware, was the MDK score. And that was really fun because sometimes we'd hear like someone just got 104 and you're like, but what is that? How is that possible? Like, what hardware does this guy have? And it
was changing fast there, wasn't it? Then it was, you know, new stuff coming out all the time.
Yeah. And so that meant you can imagine that was the intent of the number, was to make you interested in knowing how you could get a 104 or a 123. Like, how is that even possible? What is that? And so, yeah, that was that we made it into 3D, and we didn't look back. We were like, we're gonna not only survive in this space, but I think we're gonna thrive in it. And so, you know, Shiny continued to grow.
Why did you decide to sell the company then?
Well, actually, the selling of Shiny happened at the beginning of 3D. So it was at that moment when I sort of panicked and realized, you know, I don't know if this team is going to be able to handle this and make this move. So I literally was, do I want to keep buying this 3D hardware and cross my fingers and hope we're going to make it? Because, you know, at the time you wouldn't know. So that's when I sold to Interplay. But in reality, that's when we ended up leveling up and going hardcore into 3D. We even made a game, which I thought was funny. It was RC Stunt Copter. I don't know if you heard of that one, but I got into as a hobby flying remote control helicopters. And that was another 3D game that we ended up making. But it was I looked at the PlayStation controller and it had two little joysticks on it. And I'm like, that looks just like the same controller you use for flying remote control helicopters and planes.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that? And we ended up, you know, actually making that game. And that was a really fun little side project. Like just you know, we had our core stuff that we wanted to do, and then we just made some stuff for the heck of it. Just because, you know, why not? But definitely the 3D was the reason that I sold at the time. But in a way, having Interplay behind us added a lot more oomph because we added more marketing and the licensing out abilities and things like that.
Well, David, honestly, we could talk to you all day. You know, you've got such an interesting career and such a fascinating history behind you. You know, we appreciate you're a busy guy, though. And I mean, obviously, since then, you know, your career has gone from strength to strength. What are you working on at the moment then? And is there anything we should look out for?
Well, yeah, the last thing I did in the game industry that was big was cloud gaming. And that company ended up getting bought by PlayStation. And during that time, I sort of decided I was going to retire. I think it was time to retire. And so, and of course, the Matrix with Atari. So those two things led me to go, maybe it's time to retire. And I got the world's best man cave over here, with woodworking and metalworking and 3D printing, and I had a photo studio and everything else. And so I got really interested in learning about photography. And as a result, I started taking pictures of social media influencers, because I realized no one cared about my pictures. But if I had a social media influencer in there, then, you know, people would want to see those pictures. And that led me into wanting to know more about the space and getting into e-commerce. And I ended up co-founding a company where we're helping brands collaborate with each other and with celebrities and influencers. And we now have 30,000 brands using this technology. And so I don't know what happened. I'm supposed to be retired. I should be sitting with my feet up playing games. Instead, I have a company with, 40 employees building futuristic e-commerce technology. So I don't know what happened. It just happened. And I'm enjoying it, to be honest, because it's made me much cooler for my daughter, because now we're dealing with all these cool brands. So she wasn't so into the video games, but brands is interesting. So I've kind of enjoyed learning about that space. And I think that's part of what this is all about. Game industry people, I think, are you have to innovate or you die in our industry. And so in a way, when you go into another industry, and if that's your mentality of let's innovate, I think it's actually it makes it kind of fun. I believe we could move into just about, I think you could take really good video game people and move them into any industry. And I think they would come from a different vector and have different ideas and thoughts. And so I think it's actually very healthy, and I'm enjoying it. But anyway, so somehow, I don't know how, but I'm in e-commerce. Our company's called Carro. Our website is getcarro.com. So getcarro.com.
David, long may the innovation continue. And I do hope you get to put your feet up at some point, though.
Please. I want to play games. I want to put my feet up, just relax. That hasn't happened yet. This has been many, many years since, 1982, I think. I could use a break at some point. But anyway,
what a ride.
This has been fun. Thank you so much for taking the time.